The same night I buried our stillborn child, my husband sent me a photo, holding his newborn son with another woman. That was the moment I stopped crying, because I knew what I had to do. If you've ever felt the burn of betrayal, or dreamed of seeing justice served cold, hit that subscribe button. Like this video, and stay with me, because what I did next turned grief into vengeance, and left him with nothing but regret. The room was cold. Not because of the hospital air conditioning, but because something inside me had died. Something I had never thought I could lose. I sat still, wrapped in a paper-thin blanket, numb from the waist down. The doctor had long since left. The nurses had offered their quiet condolences and retreated. And now, I was alone. Not just in the room, but in every sense that mattered. The small bundle in my arms was still. Too still. I ran my finger along her cheek, soft, perfect, untouched by life. Her name was supposed to be Alira. I had imagined whispering it 1,000 times. But she would never hear it. She would never cry, never take a breath, never know her mother. And her father. He was nowhere to be found. I hadn't even told him yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because I already knew where he was. I reached for my phone with hands that felt detached from my body. It was habit now, muscle memory. The screen lit up. And there it was. He's here. Our son is born. 7.2 pounds, strong and healthy. Julia did amazing. I'll call you soon. The pain didn't register at first. Only the silence. Then the words settled like ice shards in my chest. Our son. Julia. Did amazing. He had left me to give birth to a stillborn child alone, because he was at the birth of another woman's baby. A child I hadn't even known existed. No. That's not true. Deep down, I had known. The missed calls. The unexplained trips. The vague work emergencies. The new cologne he never used to wear. I had been ignoring the signs for months, clinging to the dream that once was. Hoping, somehow, that the man I married, Adrian, was still in there. But he wasn't. Adrian had already left. He just forgot to take his things with him. A laugh tried to escape my throat, but it came out strangled. I pressed the phone to my chest and stared at the wall. My legs were still sore. My body broken. My heart, obliterated. But my mind, crystal clear. That text wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't even a second thought. I was a ghost of the life he had already discarded. But I wasn't going to stay dead. That night, I folded the baby blanket I had spent hours choosing. I tucked it into the hospital bag and zipped it shut like a coffin. My time grieving was over. I had nothing left to lose. I didn't leave the hospital empty-handed. I walked out with something far heavier than grief. I walked out with purpose. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It wasn't some movie scene of screaming and throwing plates. It was cold. Calculated. Precise. And I had 9 months of heartbreak to fuel it. I went home, not to the house Adrian and I shared. That place was already infected with lies. I returned to the apartment I had kept in my name for years, a relic from before the marriage. A place he had once called my little box. I hadn't told him I kept it. Good. I didn't want him to know where I was. Not yet. I sat at my desk, plugged in my old laptop, and let the screen flicker to life. I hadn't touched it in months. Maybe more. But all the files were still there, passwords, contracts, real estate records, company memos. Adrian never thought to change anything. He thought I was weak. That was his first mistake. The second. Thinking he could replace me and never pay the price. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed in the first password, A+C forever. My fingers didn't shake. My pulse didn't race. If anything, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Adrian believed in power. Money. Control. Appearances. I was going to take every single one of those things from him. Slowly. Quietly. And by the time he realized what I had done, it would be too late. I opened the first document. A list of joint assets. Properties. Offshore accounts. His signature was everywhere. And mine. Still valid. Adrian had built his empire assuming I would never bite the hand that fed me. But he had forgotten what happens when you starve a woman long enough. She learns how to feed herself, with blood. The address wasn't hard to find. Adrian never tried to hide. That wasn't his style. He flaunted everything, success, love, loyalty, wealth, as if showing it off made it real. A man like him didn't believe in consequences, only in performance. So of course his celebration would be grand. Loud. Photographed. Public. And of course, she would be there. Julia. The new prize. The woman who now had what I'd lost. I found the invite through a shared friend's Instagram story. A sleek restaurant opening downtown. Adrian's firm had invested in it, naturally, he'd be the star guest. A toast for the new venture, the new family, the new chapter. I stared at the story for a long time. Champagne glasses clinking. Her smile glowing under the soft gold light. His arm wrapped around her waist like it belonged there. They looked perfect. For a moment, it almost felt like watching my own life from the outside. As if someone had stolen my role, recast the parts, and left me behind in the discarded script. But I wasn't forgotten. I was the author now. I dressed carefully that evening. Not to impress. Not to seduce. I wore black. Simple. Elegant. The kind of outfit that let me vanish in plain sight. I didn't want to be seen. Not yet. I wanted to see them. The restaurant glowed like a lighthouse at the end of the boulevard. Big glass windows, tall curtains, velvet rope. Smiling hosts ushered in laughing guests. I walked straight past them, slipping in behind a couple too drunk to care. No one stopped me. I moved like I belonged, because once, I had. The music inside was soft jazz. Live. A pianist in the corner played something smooth, forgettable. The air smelled of truffle oil and ambition. Servers in crisp white shirts floated like ghosts between tables. And there, at the far end of the room, him. Adrian stood tall, laughing, a glass of something expensive in his hand. He looked relaxed, rejuvenated, alive. Julia sat beside him in a flowing pale blue dress, one hand resting on a bassinet positioned like a centerpiece. I froze. The baby slept inside. A warm, wriggling little boy. The room toasted. Adrian kissed Julia's temple. Cameras clicked. Her eyes sparkled. Mine burned. But I didn't move. Not yet. I stood in the shadow of a curtain near the back, unnoticed, invisible. A ghost. I watched the man who had once whispered promises into my neck now whispering into someone else's ear. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't grief. It was rage. Not the kind that screams. The kind that simmers. Boils slowly beneath the surface until the lid blows off and no one survives the blast. I wanted to scream. But I smiled. Because this was no longer pain. This was fuel. I turned and left, walking out just as unnoticed as I had entered. No one followed. No one called my name. I didn't exist in that room. And that was exactly how I wanted it. You see, revenge only works when they think you're gone. The next morning, I was back at my desk before sunrise. Adrian had always prided himself on transparency. He'd never feared giving me access to his business, because he never saw me as capable of using it. I was his wife. His background. The decorative attachment to a man with real power. So when he opened companies, bought properties, shifted money across borders, I signed things without asking. I smiled through meetings. I served drinks during negotiations. He thought I was dumb. I wasn't. I was learning. I opened our joint files and began mapping everything. His firm, his trusts, his real estate LLCs. There were backdoors in all of them. Weak points. Inconsistencies. All signs of arrogance. A man like Adrian never cleaned up after himself. I marked 3 companies immediately. Ones that carried both our names. Ones where he used my social security to leverage loans. Ones he no longer monitored, because he thought they didn't matter. They mattered now. I didn't drain them. Not yet. That would be too obvious. Instead, I started sowing doubt. Quiet moves. Transferring tiny amounts between dormant accounts. Signing small purchases under his name, all legal, all messy. I redirected one company's registration address to an empty lot in New Jersey. Another, I tied to a fake consulting firm I set up the same night. Each step was like carving a path through a forest he didn't know he owned. By the end of the week, Adrian's name was tied to an unpaid luxury yacht invoice in Croatia. A $500K business equipment loan co-signed with a company that didn't exist. And a real estate holding being sued for breach of zoning laws in a state he'd never been to. All of it. Legal. Tied to him. Verified. And none of it traceable to me. He would have to fix it. Untangle it. Explain it. But he couldn't. Because he didn't know where it came from. He didn't even know who was holding the knife. I did. The next day, I sent my first anonymous message. Not to him. Never to him. I sent it to one of his largest investors. Just a single line. Have you reviewed Adrian's holding disclosures this quarter? That's all. No threat. No accusation. Just enough to make them pause. People with money don't like questions they can't answer. And Adrian? He didn't know it yet, but his answers were about to run out. Adrian always moved with certainty. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and assumed it belonged to him. Boardrooms bent to his will. Investors leaned in when he spoke. Assistants scrambled, accountants obeyed, and banks cleared the path before he even arrived. He had built an empire on polished charm and cold efficiency. But empires built on ego always crack from the inside. It started with a call from his accountant. Just a hiccup. A missing transaction in one of the shell companies. Adrian barely blinked. He paid people to fix problems, not to explain them. Then came the email from the compliance officer. A flagged signature. He waved it off. Then a message from a client, a deal postponed. Just a delay, he told himself. But the weight was beginning to shift beneath him. Meanwhile, I moved like smoke. Unseen. Untraceable. Each morning I sat at my laptop, eyes scanning the threads I had begun to weave into his life. I watched accounts misaligned by a fraction. Tiny fluctuations. Just enough to cause confusion. Nothing big enough to scream sabotage. But it wasn't about the amount. It was about the pattern. It was about erosion. I forged 2 more signatures. Transferred ownership of one of our small real estate companies to a new holding under my name, done through legal loopholes I had studied late into the night. I rerouted internal emails through dummy servers. I mirrored company statements with fabricated discrepancies. By the time Adrian's firm caught on, his books were already dirty. And when his auditor finally flagged the anomalies, it was too late. His team scrambled. Emails flew. Urgent meetings were scheduled. Adrian, for the first time, looked unsure in a meeting. That's when I knew the cracks were showing. And I wasn't done. I remembered something he once said to me during an argument, years ago, back when I still believed in us. I had found a message on his phone, something flirty from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're too emotional to understand the bigger picture." Now, I was the bigger picture. And he was drowning in it. But I wasn't alone in this plan. There was someone else who deserved to know the truth. Someone he never saw as a threat. Julia. She wasn't innocent, no. She had smiled while stealing another woman's life. But she was also fragile in ways Adrian couldn't understand. She liked comfort. Predictability. Pretty things. She didn't love Adrian, she loved what he provided. And I knew exactly how to pull the thread. The message I sent her was short. You might want to check your shared account. Some transfers are missing. That's all. No name. No sender. Just a nudge. I didn't need her to confront him. Not yet. I needed her to doubt him. A few days later, I created a fake social media profile. No followers. No posts. I followed her from it and liked every photo where she tagged Adrian. Then I sent one more message. Are you sure you're the only one he's been building a future with? Women like Julia don't ignore those things. They spiral. They overthink. They snoop. And that's exactly what she did. I had planned it so carefully. A few fake bank statements slipped into a shared folder. Slightly edited. Just enough to suggest she wasn't the only one in the picture. That there were payments. Unexplained expenses. Travel she didn't know about. She started to crack. I wasn't there when she confronted him. But I didn't have to be. Because I got the email 2 hours later. From Adrian. Subject line, what the hell is going on? No greeting. No warmth. Just panic. His message was short, clipped, suspicious. I need to meet. Now. There's something wrong with the books. I don't know if someone's inside. This could ruin everything. I let it sit. An hour. Then 2. Then I replied with one sentence. Maybe you should talk to Julia. He didn't write back. But I knew. He had started to feel it now, the slow shift of sand beneath his feet. The dread that creeps in at 2 a.m. when the numbers don't match and the people closest to you start avoiding eye contact. Adrian didn't know it yet, but his real problem wasn't the money. It was the silence. The absence of control. And the very real possibility that someone he had forgotten was now 10 steps ahead of him. Adrian didn't sleep well anymore. I could tell. It was in the photos. The candid shots his friends posted, the half smiles during business events, the forced body language that once radiated confidence now dulled by something heavier. Julia wasn't by his side in every picture anymore either. Sometimes, just his assistant. Sometimes, no one at all. Good. It meant the foundation was shifting. The life he curated, the image of the perfect man, the devoted partner, the brilliant businessman, was beginning to slip. And all it took was for someone to finally say, I see through you. He had built everything on a lie. On me. I had supported him when no one believed in him. I had co-signed those early business loans, sat quietly beside him when meetings got heated, handed him coffee before his interviews, smiled while men called me the pretty wife, and dismissed every ounce of intelligence behind my silence. He had used my credit, my contacts, even my father's connections. And when he got what he wanted, he replaced me with a woman who didn't know where the cracks were. But I knew. And now, I was putting a spotlight on every one of them. The offshore accounts were the next to go. They were his pride. His secret treasure chests. But even treasure chests can be emptied if you know the combinations. And Adrian had been foolish enough to leave his trail on 3 of them, ones we opened during our marriage, using my ID for convenience. He thought I had forgotten. I hadn't. It started with a transfer. Small. Innocuous. Then a flag. Then a freeze. The Cayman account was first. Then Belize. Then the one in Luxembourg that he thought no one could ever touch. All flagged. All suspicious. Not because of the money. Because of the forged approvals. His signature. On forms he didn't remember signing. My fingerprints nowhere in sight. That same week, I sent a carefully worded tip to the Financial Watchdog Committee. No threats. No trail. Just a breadcrumb. A high-profile investor is using dormant shell companies to move funds off the books. Look into Carter and Wells. That was all I needed. I knew how these things worked. Even a whisper can start a storm if it lands in the right ear. And Carter and Wells was his core. The crown jewel. The company he started with a friend back in college. The one that made him a millionaire before he was 35. The one he used to build every other lie. I wasn't going to destroy it quickly. No. I was going to unravel it slowly. From the inside. So I messaged someone who used to work there. A man Adrian had pushed out years ago during a hostile merger. A quiet, intelligent analyst named Omar. He had always been kind to me. Treated me like a person when no one else in those rooms did. And when I sent him a message from an anonymous email with the subject line, "Proof you were right," he responded in less than an hour. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't need to. I sent him the doctored statements. The leaked loan documents. The shell company ownerships. The date-stamped transfers. He called it a web of rot. I called it justice. And he wanted in. That was the thing about men like Adrian. They climb ladders built on the people they step over, and they never think those people will rise again. But Omar had nothing to lose anymore. And everything to expose. He submitted the report. Signed the affidavit. Launched a private review board inquiry with 3 other former employees. And within days, Adrian's company was under audit. He didn't know it was me. But I think, deep down, he suspected. Because late one night, I got a message. Just one word. Why? It was from his number. No context. No pleading. Just that single syllable, jagged and tired. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He was finally asking the right question. The next morning, his face was on the news. Adrian Carter, CEO of Carter and Wells, under investigation for financial misconduct. Sources allege illegal movement of assets and potential fraud. The segment was brief. But it was enough. Enough for the investors to start calling. Enough for board members to stop answering. Enough for Julia to pack a bag. I watched the footage of him leaving his office building. Hounded by reporters. Head down. Jaw clenched. The man who used to tower above everyone now looked human. Small. Fragile. I didn't smile. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't done. Julia was the kind of woman who fell in love with comfort, not chaos. That's how Adrian found her. Perfectly polished, beautifully unaware, eager to please. She didn't ask many questions, because she didn't want complicated answers. In Adrian's world, that made her the perfect partner, malleable, elegant, silent. But silence doesn't last when the walls begin to shake. After the news broke, she stopped posting. No baby pictures. No brunch dates. No polished couple selfies with captions about growth and gratitude. Just a quiet disappearance from the online stage she once treated like her diary. I knew she was slipping. And I knew how to push her further. A new message arrived in her inbox the next morning. Anonymous, of course. You should know, Adrian's properties aren't fully in his name anymore. One of them lists a new owner. Not you. No signature. No proof. Just enough to plant the seed. I imagined her reading it. Sitting in their designer kitchen, the baby on her lap, confusion bleeding into paranoia. She'd check the records. She'd call the lawyers. And when the records didn't match, her panic would grow teeth. That's what fear does, it consumes the very thing it used to protect. Over the next few days, she made her move. Quietly. Strategically. She contacted a real estate attorney, one I had already looped into a fake inquiry under Adrian's name. The lawyer confirmed what I had prepared him to say, the ownership of their Hamptons property had shifted due to outdated trusts and overlapping claims. She pulled $250,000 from their shared account the next day. Not enough to raise alarms. Just enough for a safety net. But Adrian noticed. He sent her a message, one that eventually leaked. I've handled everything. You have nothing to worry about. But Julia wasn't reassured. She was watching the storm roll in now, and it wasn't poetic anymore. It was real. Messy. Legal. And threatening everything she had attached her identity to. So I sent her one more push. This time with documentation. A doctored image of Adrian's offshore transfer report. It listed transactions to a name eerily similar to his assistant. The implication was clear, he was moving money to someone else. Another woman. I didn't need her to believe it fully. Just enough to ignite the question, what if? What if she wasn't his only betrayal? What if she wasn't special? The beautiful illusion Adrian had created for her, of being chosen, adored, protected, was fracturing. And once it broke, she'd fall faster than even he could catch. 3 nights later, she left. Packed 2 suitcases. Booked a flight under her maiden name. And took the baby. Not to her mother's. To a condo downtown, one I had arranged under a dummy lease, so I could track her movements without ever being seen. Adrian didn't know she was gone until the nanny called, asking if Julia would be back before sunrise. He called her. She didn't answer. He texted. Nothing. He emailed. Silence. When she finally responded, her words were cold. Don't contact me again until your mess is cleared. I won't let you drag us down with you. That was the message I wanted him to read. That was the sound of the last rope slipping from his hands. He had always believed Julia was his clean slate. His redemption story. His reward. But Julia wasn't loyal. She was loyal to stability. And once that was gone, so was she. Adrian spiraled. He pulled his accounts. Called his lawyers. Tried to trace the source of every anomaly, every signature, every account he didn't recognize. He stayed up all night reading documents he hadn't touched in years. Cross-referencing forms he once shrugged off, contracts he thought were harmless. And every page only added to the panic. Because nothing made sense anymore. He couldn't trust his team. He couldn't trust his books. And now, he couldn't even trust the woman he built his second life with. His silence screamed. And I listened to every second of it. You see, Adrian had always lived above the clouds. But now he was falling. And I was the wind beneath his descent. My phone rang at 11:42 p.m. It was a number I hadn't saved, but I knew exactly who it was. You don't spend a decade loving someone, hurting for them, breaking for them, without memorizing the rhythm of their desperation. I let it ring until the final second before answering. Hello. I said, calm as ice. There was a pause. Then his voice. Celia. Just that. My name. No apology. No explanation. No pretense. I didn't respond. He cleared his throat, and I could hear the strain, like a man holding a facade with hands full of cracks. I need to see you, he said. The audacity. Even now, with his house of cards blowing away in the wind, he still thought he could summon me. I let the silence sit. Celia, he continued, I know something's happening. Something I can't control. I'm not accusing you. I need help. That word, help, sounded foreign in his mouth. He had never used it before. He had always been the one offering favors, holding doors open with a smirk, making you feel like gratitude was a leash you had to wear. But now he was begging. I inhaled slowly. You should talk to your lawyer. I've talked to everyone, he snapped, his mask slipping. They're not answering. They're freezing. Pulling out. Even Julia's gone. I'm bleeding, Celia. I stood by the window of my apartment, the moonlight casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I didn't say a word. Celia, please. There it was. The crack in his voice. The first time I had heard him say that word and actually mean it. But I wasn't the same woman who once begged him to hold my hand in the hospital while I delivered silence into the world. So I asked, do you remember what you texted me the night Alira was born? Silence. You said, he's here. 7 pounds. Julia did amazing. He said nothing. You didn't ask if I survived. You didn't ask what we lost. You sent a birth announcement like I was a distant cousin. I could hear his breath on the other end, uneven, heavy. I'm sorry, he whispered. No, I said, my voice sharp. You're sorry you got caught. Another silence. Then, what do you want from me? It was the question he should have asked a long time ago. I let the moment hang, then answered with a truth he couldn't bear. Nothing. That's the point. There's nothing left I want from you. He exhaled sharply, like he had been punched. You did this. Didn't you? I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I let the weight of his own guilt answer for me. Then I added, you built your world without me. You didn't think I mattered. You thought I was replaceable. Disposable. I paused, letting the words twist like a knife. And now you get to watch what happens when the thing you threw away becomes the only one who knows where the cracks are. He tried to speak. I didn't let him. I buried our child alone. Well, you kissed another woman. Now you can bury the man you used to be. Then I ended the call. No goodbye. No mercy. Just the echo of justice, delivered in full. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious. But because I was wide awake, with clarity, with control. Adrian had called because the panic had finally caught up to him. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was grasping for someone to save him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The next morning, his name was trending. Adrian Carter financial collapse. CEO under fire for offshore fraud. Exodus of investors begins amid scandal. The media didn't even wait for a verdict. They started writing his eulogy before the ink dried on the investigation. Julia gave an interview that afternoon, calculated, poised, dripping with carefully chosen regret. She said, "I had no idea. I trusted him completely. I just want to protect my son." She played the victim. And Adrian? He didn't even show up to the press conference his firm had scheduled. His seat stayed empty. The cameras waited. The reporters speculated. And then the firm's PR rep made a statement. Effective immediately, Adrian Carter has resigned as CEO of Carter & Wells. No applause. No thank you. Just the final nail in a coffin he had hammered together himself. I watched it from my couch. Still in my robe. Tea in hand. The same couch where I had once cried for hours after he stopped returning my calls in the maternity ward. Now I sat in silence. Not with grief. With peace. Not because he had fallen. But because I didn't have to push anymore. Gravity had taken over. By the end of that week, Adrian Carter was no longer a man, he was a headline. The kind people whispered about in elevators and group chats. The kind the media tore apart with surgical precision. Photos from his glory days, smiling, powerful, untouchable, were now juxtaposed against grainy images of him leaving his office in the same crumpled shirt 2 days in a row. His empire wasn't just burning. It was collapsing in full view of the world. I watched as article after article painted him with a new brush, not visionary, but fraud. Not innovator, but manipulator. Everything he had built was now redefined through the lens of scandal. And the people? They didn't rally. They didn't defend. They devoured. Because people love a rise. But they adore a fall. Especially when the fall comes from so high. Especially when it's deserved. That Friday, Carter & Wells stock plummeted 47%. 3 board members resigned. One of his longest-standing clients filed a lawsuit for breach of contract. Adrian tried to issue a public statement, a last-ditch effort to salvage control. It was a 5-minute video. Stiff, scripted, desperate. He sat behind a desk, shoulders tense, eyes hollow. "This is not who I am," he said. But it was. Everyone could see it now. And for the first time in years, no one cared to protect him. I expected him to disappear. To vanish into silence, as men like him often do, hide in some overseas villa and wait for time to wash their names clean. But Adrian didn't have that luxury. Because everything he owned was frozen. Every account. Every asset. Every piece of false security. Julia, of course, had moved on. Fast. I found out she was negotiating a book deal, in his shadow, My Life with Adrian Carter. The betrayal didn't sting. Not even a little. Because Julia wasn't getting back at me. She was trying to reclaim her own dignity. That's what women do when they've been used. They tell their side of the story. She would never know how much of her collapse I orchestrated. And that was fine. Because her leaving him was just a bonus. Adrian's true punishment had only begun. I knew it the moment I saw him. It was a week after the firm collapse. I had gone to the bank to update some paperwork on an account I had opened under my name, money I had legally moved from a trust one knew he'd forgotten existed. A clerk was printing documents behind the counter, and I glanced at the screen to pass the time. That's when I saw him. Through the glass wall of the lobby. Adrian. Standing on the curb. Not a driver in sight. No luxury car. No tailored coat. No assistant hovering nearby with his schedule. He wore a basic black jacket. A hoodie underneath. Wrinkled jeans. His hands were shoved into his pockets, and his eyes looked lost. Not angry. Not proud. Just hollow. He stared at the building like it used to be his. And maybe, once, it had been. But now it was just another place he was no longer welcome. I didn't go to him. I didn't speak. I watched as he turned away, slowly, like his body no longer carried certainty. Just wait. That's what grief does. That's what betrayal feels like. He had delivered it to me in the maternity ward like a death sentence. And now, he was living in its echo. Later that day, I heard from Omar, the former analyst. He had become somewhat of a friend over the last few weeks. We didn't speak often, just enough to coordinate. Enough to pass information back and forth. Enough to know the damage was irreversible. They're filing formal charges, he said over the phone. The fraud, the offshore movement, the loan documents. It's all sticking. It's only a matter of time. I thanked him. He paused. You don't sound happy, he said. I wasn't sure how to explain it. It wasn't happiness I felt. It was closure. A slow, heavy kind of justice that didn't erupt like fireworks. It seeped into your bones. Cold. Honest. Final. I had spent so long grieving that I didn't know what peace looked like. Now I did. It looked like Adrian Carter, alone on a sidewalk. No cameras. No lights. No cheers. Just a man being forced to live with himself. I hung up the call and stepped out into the street, letting the wind hit my face. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't walking in anyone's shadow. There's always one final piece. The thing they forget to protect. The thing they assume is too small to matter. For Adrian, it was a forgotten storage unit on the edge of the city. Not a flashy investment. Not $1 million portfolio. Just a simple 12 by 12 metal box inside a facility he'd used during our early years, back when we were still building, still struggling. Back when he still trusted me with everything. He listed it in my name once, as a favor. Then forgot it existed. I didn't. That unit contained the original documents of his first company. Paperwork. Signatures. Backdated loan statements. Fudged invoices from those early hustle days when Adrian was still learning how to cheat just well enough to succeed. He had always assumed no one would dig that deep. But I had time. Time and motive. So I returned to the unit. The key was still hidden behind the third loose brick of the wall outside, exactly where we used to keep it, wrapped in a plastic bag, dry and untouched. My hand shook for a moment when I pulled it free, not from fear, but from memory. So much had started here. And now, it would end here. I opened the unit and stepped into the cold silence. It smelled like old paper and dust. A time capsule of everything he wanted buried. I sifted through boxes until I found what I came for, the red folder. Labeled only with 2 words, early assets. Inside were receipts that contradicted everything he'd claimed under oath in court filings. Private equity transfers listed under fake partners. Business expenses paid through ghost vendors. And worst of all, documents tying his father's old company to a scheme Adrian had promised never existed. I wasn't a lawyer. But I knew enough to understand what this meant. Fraud was one thing. Perjury. That was federal. I scanned the documents, took pictures, then resealed the folder. Not to destroy it. To deliver it. I knew exactly who to send it to, an old friend of my father's. A compliance officer turned investigator. Retired, but sharp as ever. Someone who had once warned me, "Don't let love make you blind, Celia." Men like Adrian never stop taking. They just get better at hiding it. I emailed him the files that night with a note. I finally stopped being blind. 2 days later, he called me. His tone was grave. "These papers. They're not just damaging. They're catastrophic. You understand what you've just done?" "I do," I said. He exhaled. "This won't end with a slap on the wrist. This could go criminal." I was quiet for a moment, then answered truthfully. "Good." The next morning, Adrian's name was no longer just a headline. It was on the Department of Justice's website. Adrian Carter under investigation for financial misconduct, falsified federal filings, and perjury. The press exploded. His former board members gave statements filled with shock and disappointment. But I saw through it. They all knew. They had just waited for someone else to light the match. And now they were pretending to smell smoke for the first time. Adrian tried to fight it, of course. He hired new lawyers. Held a private press dinner. Leaked a sympathy piece to a second-tier financial magazine, painting himself as the victim of a malicious hacking. But it didn't stick. Not anymore. Too many dots were connecting. Too many eyes were watching. And too many people were quietly relieved to see a man like him finally fall. I wasn't surprised when I got another call from him. Blocked number. No voicemail. Just 3 rings, then silence. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to know if it was me. And that silence. That was my answer. I spent the evening going through the last of the paperwork, sorting what I would keep and what I would send forward to legal teams still digging through the wreckage. And as I did, I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not even a little. Because Adrian's downfall wasn't mine to celebrate. It was simply the natural consequence of a man who believed there was no bottom. Until he hit it. The next week, I passed by one of his old favorite restaurants, the place where he first told me he was going to change the world. It had a new name now. New owner. Fresh paint. But the bones were the same. I smiled as I walked by. Not because I missed anything. But because I didn't. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the pavement, the wind brushing softly through my coat. Free. Not of him. But of the version of me that once needed his validation. And in that moment, I realized. The last asset he didn't know I owned. Was myself. Names used to mean everything to Adrian. His brand was his name. His legacy was his name. His reputation, the thing he clung to like a crown, was built on those 7 letters, Carter. He had it stitched onto cufflinks. Engraved on leather folders. Printed across the top of every contract, business card, press kit. Adrian Carter, he once told a journalist, is a name that opens doors. But now it closed them. I knew things had reached a new low when he tried to rebrand. A quiet announcement came through one of his ghost-run media pages. He was stepping away from public view, he claimed. Starting something leaner, more grounded. He even removed his last name from the website. Just Adrian. Like a first-name-only artist. Like it would make people forget. But people didn't forget. They searched. They found articles. Headlines. Threaded Reddit exposés. Court filings. Photos of him at airport lounges, no longer in business class, no longer with Julia, no longer surrounded by people who nodded and took notes. Adrian had become a cautionary tale. A warning for young entrepreneurs. And he hated it. Because for men like him, obscurity isn't just failure, it's erasure. He made one last move. One desperate attempt to claw something back. He filed a lawsuit against Carter and Wells. Yes, his own former company, claimed wrongful dismissal, defamation, breach of contract. It was absurd. But it was also expected. Adrian always needed someone else to blame. But this time, no one took the bait. The firm's response was surgical. They submitted documentation showing his own signature authorizing his resignation. And when that didn't work, they submitted something else. A document I had helped prepare. One that proved he had signed over voting power months earlier to cover a liquidity shortfall, effectively stripping himself of control. He didn't remember doing it. But I did. Because I was the one who had drawn up the document in the first place, when I still believed I was saving our marriage by managing the stress for him. Now that same paper was his final nail. The court threw out the lawsuit in days. His name was mocked in legal blogs. Screenshot and shared across LinkedIn posts as a symbol of arrogance unchecked. He had gone from being the subject of admiration to the punchline of memes. And what did he have left? No wife. No son. No firm. No income. No allies. No name that meant anything anymore. Just a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he once refused to drive through, and the same coffee shop he used to mock, now his only source of free Wi-Fi. But he didn't know the worst part. Not yet. The real twist. I had filed paperwork weeks ago. A quiet motion to strip his name from the last jointly owned trademark, Carter Foundation, the charity he had started in our early years, back when we still dreamed together, before it became a front for tax write-offs. It had been inactive since the scandal. Dormant. Useless. But still registered. Still half mine. So I reclaimed it. Renamed it. Rebuilt it. And a month later, the site went live under a new title. The Alira Foundation. In memory of our daughter. Not his legacy. Mine. It focused on maternal health, grief counseling, and legal aid for women who had lost everything and were ready to take it back. I didn't need his permission. I didn't even need his signature. He had already given me all the access I needed, back when he thought I'd never use it. A former journalist reached out shortly after the foundation launch. She asked if I'd be willing to speak about my journey, about grief, betrayal, and reclaiming power. I said yes. Not to be vindictive. But because I wasn't hiding anymore. When the article came out, it trended for 3 days. Not because it named Adrian. It didn't. It never had to. It was about me. My story. My name. That was the final blow. Not the lawsuits. Not the audits. Not the media storm. But the simple, devastating truth. Adrian Carter was no longer the main character. And he never would be again. I used to think grief was an anchor. That it held you down, kept you stuck in a place where time didn't move and colors faded. After Alira died, I stopped breathing in the ways that mattered. I moved through the world like it owed me silence, like I didn't deserve anything more than the ache she left behind. And when Adrian betrayed me, when he kissed another woman while I held our daughter's lifeless body, I thought I would never recover. But I was wrong. Grief didn't anchor me. It sharpened me. It burned away the illusions, about love, about safety, about what I was willing to survive. It stripped me down to my barest self, and from those ashes, I rebuilt. Not out of hatred. But out of knowing I would never let another man decide my worth again. The day the federal charges became official, I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne. No group texts. No social media posts. I just lit a candle. For Alira. For the little girl who never opened her eyes, but somehow still managed to open mine. I sat by her tiny memory box, her hospital bracelet, the last ultrasound printout, the soft yellow onesie she was supposed to wear home, and I whispered. He lost everything. And I found myself. Because that's what it really came down to. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It never truly was. Revenge was the fire. But healing. That was the rebuild. I didn't need Adrian to hurt as much as I had. I just needed to reclaim what he stole from me. My dignity. My voice. My future. And I had. The Alira Foundation was already gaining traction. We had donors, volunteers, women writing in daily with stories that echoed mine, some louder, some softer, but all of them real. One of them wrote. I thought I was the only one. Then I heard your story. Now I'm fighting back. That message made me cry. Not from pain. But from knowing that something good had finally grown out of something so cruel. A month later, I saw Adrian again. By accident. I had just finished a speaking engagement and stopped by a downtown cafe. He was sitting outside at a plastic table, laptop open, staring at a spreadsheet he didn't understand. He looked tired. Older. Not in the gray hair way. In the soul-worn, spirit-cracked way that men look when the power they once wore like armor becomes a weight they can no longer carry. He didn't see me. And I didn't go to him. I simply watched from the doorway for a moment. Then I walked away. Not because I was afraid. But because there was nothing left to say. Adrian Carter was a lesson. And I had learned it. 2 weeks after that, I finally changed my last name. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't a gesture of finality or defiance. It was a return. To the woman I had always been, before I ever loved a man who treated people like furniture, useful until they weren't. Celia Rowan. That's who I was now. Not Carter's wife. Not a footnote in someone else's redemption arc. But the author of my own. And when the legal documents came in the mail, I smiled. Because the last thread tying me to that man was gone. I closed the envelope and stood by the window of my apartment, bigger now, brighter, filled with art and books and sunlight. The wind outside whispered through the city like a promise. I thought of Alira. I thought of the moment I first felt her kick. Of how I sang to her every night. Of how I swore I'd be strong, even if I had to fake it. She never got to see the world. But she changed it anyway. Because I changed. I became the kind of woman my daughter could have been proud of. And that was the only legacy that mattered. The world would forget Adrian Carter. But it would remember Alira. It would remember the women like me who rose. Who refused to stay buried. Who turned grief into justice and silence into a roar. This story doesn't end with Adrian's collapse. It ends with my rise. And the promise that I will never again shrink to fit inside a man's shadow. My name is Celia Rowan. My daughter deserved better. And so did I.